Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new season of Media Voices. This time we're doing things ever so slightly differently. In the run-up to our annual Media Moments report, we're going to be doing 10 episodes doing deep dives into topics from subscriptions and memberships to local news, platforms, emerging tech, basically everything of note from the past year in media. And we're delighted to say that for this run of episodes, we're going to be bringing in a media expert for each and every episode. So this week we're joined by Charlotte Henry, who is a British journalist covering media, tech, culture and politics. She's behind the Edition newsletter and podcast, which you should definitely check out, which publishes investigations, news and opinion on everything from Web3 explainers to broadcast trends. Previously the UK associate editor of the Mac Observer, one of the most popular and long-standing Apple websites, where she led coverage of Apple's move into media. Charlotte, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I was a bit worried who the media expert was when you said that. And I was looking around to see who was here.
Actually, that said, now we've introduced our guest, we should probably introduce ourselves. So I'm Chris Sutcliffe.
I'm Esther Thorpe.
And I'm Peter Houston.
So the topics we're going to be discussing this season, we've got these 10 episodes. These are all going to be featured in our annual Media Moments 2022 report. This actually means that we do all the research for them early and hopefully get everything written nice and on time this year.
Fingers crossed. Yeah.
That is coming out November the 30th. You can, for the first time this year, pre-register to receive the report as soon as it goes live. So if you head over to voices.media/mm22, you can actually fill in your details and we will send you the report as soon as it goes live on November the 30th.
Although, that said, this season and the Media Moments 2022 report wouldn't be possible at all without the support of our sponsors, Poool. So Poool is the membership and subscription suite, which is used by publishers like Future, Euronews, Elle Magazine France, Harvard Business Review, and countless others around the world. So their all-in-one platform helps publishers convert, manage, retain members and subscribers. And as some of the topics we're going to be discussing this season make clear, that is still a huge focus for publishers worldwide. You can find out more about them at poool.tech. That is POOOL.tech, and we'll link to them from our show notes at voices.media. But this first episode is all about broadcast. So, Peter, why did we pick broadcast?
Well, because it's been a really busy year.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of changes in the sort of streaming space in terms of how that is funded. Are people still paying for it? What's the kind of who's fighting who in the streaming wars?
Everyone. All fighting each other, Peter. Spoiler.
Well, that's the first tech. The other side of that is what is going on in this wonderful country of ours, where the government's been getting involved and the lovely billionaire philanthropists like Rupert Murdoch have also been getting involved. So yeah, I mean, there's just so much going on. So we thought, okay, let's educate Peter.
Not just what's going on, but a sort of change in sentiment around everything from kind of traditional broadcast models to how streamers are faring. So we're going to go through a couple of headlines here to begin with, and then we're all going to pick out one of our favorite media moments from the year, just as we do in the actual print and digital report itself. So Esther, why don't you take us through what happened with streaming figures this year?
Oh gosh, this is quite a recent stat actually. Streaming has overtaken cable this year in the US. What's the equivalent of cable in the UK? What do we call it?
Combination of Freeview and Sky and those things, isn't it? It's the same kind of principle, isn't it?
I've just always called it TV. But anyway, I suppose, yeah, streaming has overtaken traditional methods of watching TV. This is just in the US, but it wouldn't surprise me, honestly, if the UK isn't far behind. So yeah, in the US last month, streamed content on Netflix, Hulu, YouTube TV and others actually amassed over a third of all viewing, 34.8%, which beat cable at 34.4% and broadcast at 21.6%.
That doesn't surprise me.
No.
Is that just because of the prevalence of it and sort of the, that people are more habituated to seeking out TV content or, even premium TV content through those streaming services now?
Yeah, and I also think this idea of event television has completely disappeared, with the exceptions of live sport and live major breaking news events. If, the conversation that you have with your friends now is not, did you watch XYZ series on Thursday night? It's, have you watched, so that you don't spoil it for someone. And most of those things are on a streaming service. And I'm actually including things that from traditional streaming services from traditional broadcasters in that. So there might be a series that's buried on the iPlayer that you haven't caught up with yet. But you're still, quote unquote, streaming it, even though it's from the BBC.
Would you say that there's anything that still counts as that kind of tentpole event TV? I'm
Bake Off.
I was about to say, I was looking at you, Esther.
I think Bake Off.
Bake Off.
I think Peter's actually going to throw me off the podcast as I say this, but I think Love Island.
Oh,
I knew he was going to do it.
He'll get into it.
But I think for people that care about Love Island, watching it as it plays out so it's not spoiled. And there's this second screen phenomenon as well, isn't there? People tweeting the whole way through the show and whatever. So I think things like that. And I mean quite seriously, I think live sport is basically the last man standing on that. There's a reason why the Sky Sports advert is it's only live once.
Absolutely.
I think that really is the thing that keeps the whole show on the road.
And we've seen so many investments in that. You know, some of the big platforms, like Amazon, for instance, has been investing heavily in getting the broadcast rights, presumably because they know that that's still a big draw. For the longest
Apple TV
time.
doing live baseball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything. I mean,
Apple TV Plus, sorry. Yeah, getting live baseball. So, yeah.
And, you know, even the platforms like Twitter, which historically haven't had that much, they've been investing in partnerships with the WNBA because they want at least a little piece of that event TV stuff. But it's not all bad news for kind of those streaming services when it comes to event TV, because there are some huge, great programs like Stranger Things. Esther, you've written down Virgin River and Umbrella Academy there. I've only seen Umbrella Academy, but that's pretty good.
Those are the top performers. I mean, I love Virgin River.
Well, are they outliers?
So those are the ones that have driven. So Netflix, there've been a lot of headlines we'll discuss later about their subscribers sort of essentially collapsing. But actually, in July, they actually gained an 8% share of viewing time because they released a huge number of things like Stranger Things, Virgin River, Umbrella Academy. There were a lot of new series that came out, and it's just all been very, very driven by. You know, Netflix subscribers will pick up when they release something good, and then basically when there's nothing to watch, everybody cancels for like 2 or 3 months.
Well, that was why the way they stretched out Stranger Things, wasn't it? The last series of Stranger Things,
that's so
to make sure people didn't do exactly what Esther's describing.
I love the idea that you go and kind of go, okay, we'll broadcast it all except the last episode, which will be coming. No, the last 5 minutes of the last episode will be coming 6 months down the line.
HBO had this when Game of Thrones ended a couple of years ago. Like everybody just en masse just cancelled.
Well,
yeah, I think actually Game of Thrones back in the day counted as event TV. I mean, I'm not into those type of fantasy series, but I remember friends staying up till whatever time in the morning to watch it before work so that it didn't get ruined for them.
I think it might be that. I think it might be that Game of Thrones finale might have been the last time that we had people round to watch something, and it was 6 a.m. in the morning, and my mate Phil just turned up to watch it. We turned up to watch it. Everyone was disappointed at the same time, and then we all went back to bed. It was great.
Very normal behaviour.
But that said, I suppose the sentiment around streaming services it's never, I suppose, particularly been one that's healthy.
I think they were living on, I don't know, borrowed time's quite right. They were just living on the fact that for a while there wasn't that many of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so and $6.99 here, $9.99 there, even a little bit more, didn't really matter very much to most consumers. And then suddenly there's loads of them, and it's all quite, all the different shows you might want to watch are all quite spread out now. And we're now for the first time since streaming has become very mainstream, if you excuse the pun, has become where we're weighing up what decisions are of value for us. I had this with Paramount Plus. First came to the UK, and I tried it for a week because that was the free trial period. And then I was like, actually, there's not enough here. Basically, the only reason you need Paramount Plus at the moment in the UK is if you have to have everything ever from Star Trek available at your fingertips at any moment. And for some people, that's really important. That's great, and it can be the Star Trek service, and that's fine. But a lot of that stuff is still for the moment on Netflix, and so I was like, I don't need to add another direct debit, and so I haven't bothered, and that's fine.
Exactly. TNG's on Netflix. You don't need to go elsewhere. That's the best one.
I think one of the things that we did was, for the first time ever, was do a subscription audit. Where we actually added up what we were spending between Amazon, Netflix, Spotify, Disney, I don't know what else, Sky, And it's actually quite scary when you add it all up,
Mm-hmm.
and you realise that you haven't watched it. Well, for us, it was Amazon, although I kept Amazon because of Prime.
Yeah. Well,
but I haven't watched anything on Amazon for ages.
Amazon's its own beast, isn't it? But what we're leading up to here is the idea that as we come into what looks to be quite a severe cost of living crisis, some streaming services have had to adapt, because the idea that people will pay for something that they don't necessarily get the most value out of it's changing. It's scary for them, the idea that people don't have that disposable income now. And so there have been lots of arguments that the streaming revolution has peaked, the kind of the boom time for that. The gold rush has been and gone. And Netflix, with a big headline here, they lost 200,000 subscribers in the first 3 months of the year, and an additional 1 million in Q2. I wonder if you could chart that by originals.
Possibly. And I have to say, between February and probably July, I was very seriously thinking about it, because there was just nothing on there. And then in July, they brought out a load of new stuff, and I've stayed with them. But I think what's particularly interesting about this and Netflix is the fact that, because Netflix were one of the first to this, as Charlotte said at the start, they're almost being used as a bit of a kind of canary in the mine for a lot of this. So, Netflix shares dropped about 65% when they announced their Q2 results. And it wiped about $70 billion off their market capitalization. But it was the fact that all the other streaming stocks took a hit because of Netflix's poor performance. And investors are there saying, well, are we likely to see this across other services too? We talked to Toolkit's Jack Marshall a couple of weeks after Netflix announced their first subscriber loss. And he had that same theory, that it wasn't that streaming was over by any means, or that other companies should be worried. It just showed how much that pressure is on having good shows and having shows that keep people subscribed, because it is so easy to say, do you know what, I'm actually going to switch my subscription to Amazon Prime this month and watch whatever the Lord of the Rings thing is. Peter's shaking his head like you never.
I was going to say, yeah.
Exactly, like, what a fucking concept. Good stuff people pay for.
I know.
I just wanted to return, if I may, actually, to Peter's point about subscription audits, because I think it's a really important point. Because if people like the four of us are doing it, and let's be honest, we are not by any stretch of the imagination an average media consumer.
Nope.
What are you saying?
But if people like that, like us, are doing that and having these thoughts and considerations, normal people are going to be doing it by orders of magnitude more.
So there are quite a few banking apps that have actually started bringing home pages up where you can just one-click cancel a lot of these as a way to help people with cost of living. I noticed NatWest was starting to do it.
I'll say that the single best subscription in terms of value that I have is to Limmy on Twitch, because he streams 4 hours a day. It costs me £4 a month, and he is on my screen for 4 hours every day. It is far and away the best value subscription I have. That's never getting cut.
We're already seeing some stuff being bundled together. I noticed, I think it's Paramount Plus has been lobbed in with Sky Cinema, hasn't it already? And that's weeks really that it's been available in the UK, months, but
some of them aren't even necessarily being bundled. They're additive. So if you want to subscribe to the horror channel Shudder, you can do that by adding that onto your Amazon Prime subscription as well. So it really does speak to this idea that all the benefits.
Extra, though?
It does cost extra, yeah. It's not a bundling, but it speaks to this idea that what was once seen as the big benefit of streaming, of having everything in one place, and you could just do one subscription. You didn't need to pay for Sky Sports if you weren't going to watch it.
Well, I think some of that is actually coming back, and I think one of the big battles between these companies is if they can be your, this is a horrible phrase, I'm sorry, but like your TV homepage.
Yeah.
So that example of Amazon Prime Video you used, there's loads of different channels you can subscribe to within Amazon Prime Video, because they basically want to be the place where you turn on your TV and you open up the Prime Video app, and that's where you stay. And they don't care if you're watching the horror channel Shudder or one of their originals, or I think La Liga TV you can get on there, some Spanish football, and they don't care. You're paying them, they presumably get some quite decent cut of your subscription cost, and you're still within their ecosystem. And I think Apple is going to battle in this world.
Does that mean people like Sky have an advantage? Where Sky's already got a lot of these other content suppliers as part of the package?
Sure. I mean, if you open up your Sky TV, you can get to Netflix from there. You can get through, never mind all the channels you get through Sky anyway. I'm sure that is a huge advantage to them. Yeah, absolutely.
Is this why CNN Plus launched and crashed within a month? Is there just... Can the market sustain yet another streaming service, or have we hit peak subscription service, not peak subscription?
Everything went downhill when Quibi failed.
I was wondering when we were going to mention Quibi. May it rest in peace. I think there was a lot of very specific things going on with CNN Plus. So I think, first of all, news as a streaming service is difficult as a starter because you can get news in loads of other places already with stuff you already have. Second of all, I don't think CNN Plus specifically was offering enough. For example, you couldn't actually watch CNN through CNN Plus. If you just wanted to watch CNN, the news feed, you didn't get it. It wasn't part of CNN Plus. It was specific shows for that service. So if you're a big Anderson Cooper fan, who's one of the big news anchors on CNN, you couldn't watch him doing the news on CNN Plus. He had a parenting show on CNN Plus. I think the only thing that was sort of similar was there was Brian Stelter, who they made Reliable Sources at a daily show. Now Reliable Sources doesn't even exist as a weekly show, and Brian Stelter has left CNN. Chris Wallace left Fox News to join CNN Plus. I think that was meant to be like an evening talk show, and that obviously I don't know what's going on there now. But yeah, it was just a bit of a horror show, really. They had fewer than 10,000 people using the service on a daily basis.
But I can remember talking about this at the time. Like 4 weeks is not that's barely time for people to get settled into where they're sitting, their desks and what they're doing.
But there was also a bunch of internal stuff at CNN after the acquisition.
Well, the Warner Brothers Discovery merger acquisition, or however we want to coin it, totally changed the dynamic. And they just looked at this thing and were like, it's too much money.
Does this work? Yeah.
Not enough people. Done. Thanks very much. Apparently it cost it cost over £300 million. When I wrote about it back in April, they'd already spent £300 million, according to Axios. That
is madness. I almost really admire that.
$300 million.
I sort of admire them looking at that, going, you know what? I'm aware of the sunk cost fallacy. Yeah. I'm just going to walk away because I know from my experience in casinos, I would have just been like, no, we got to make this work. We've got to make this work.
It's interesting.
So many questions. Sorry.
I just got this image of him sat in front of a slot machine.
No, it was roulette. It was roulette. It was bad. As a result of some of these changes and some of these strictures that look like they're coming down, whether that's through the plurality of streaming services now, or whether that's cost of living, we're seeing them having to adapt. So for years now, I think, but it's really ramped up in the last couple of months. Netflix, Disney Plus have been clamping down on password sharing, for instance, and they're talking about introducing new ad-supported models. In fact, we know that they're coming down the pipe. So to what extent then do we think that this is a year of transition, or are we just going to have to see more and more experimentation and more audience choice as we leave 2022 and go into 2023?
Charlotte, it was quite interesting you did mention about Brian Stelter exiting CNN. We've actually had, it feels like that's been another one of the big changes this year. There's been a huge exodus of talent from some of the leading, I suppose, traditional TV and broadcast studios. I know in the UK we've had, in the BBC we've had Emily Maitlis, John Sopel, Lewis Goodall. They've all left.
The BBC brain drain goes beyond that, but yes, you're absolutely right.
And I suppose is that another thing? I suppose there's this huge wider trend of generally the older institutions, whether that be in broadcast or sort of more traditional print publishing, are really struggling to hold on to talent as some of the bigger digital opportunities come up.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing in the case of the BBC talent you just listed, and there's some behind the mic talent as well. I'm thinking of Dina Sofos, who took his podcasting skills to a new away. A lot of them, and started his own company. A lot of that is now working with the commercial rival Global. Which is a kind of interesting dynamic. They've suddenly been in Andrew Marr.
Everybody, Global has been really hoovering up talent. I've done some interesting reporting on why that might be and why so many people are exiting Broadcasting House. But yeah, the exodus of talent has been really noticeable. You're absolutely right. And we'll obviously, over the kind of remaining months of this year and into next year, we'll see what that does for the new places that these people have landed. Yeah. It's interesting.
Global payroll bill must be frightening.
Yeah. I mean, we can talk about global all day, but one of the things that we probably should acknowledge, and we always assume that people have, knowledge of this, is the fact that the BBC is still an outlier, both in terms of how it is funded, how it has to report its talent, its wages, all this kind of stuff. So we often talk about it as being kind of that elephant in the room when it comes to broadcasting in the UK. Well, actually, speaking of that, my media moment for the year has been what has been going on with Channel 4 and the BBC, because for years now, both of them have been subject of much speculation around how they're funded, whether that's through license fees, whether that's through Channel 4's ad-supported businesses. And this year, there's been endless back and forth on what's going on with the license fee and potential privatization of Channel 4. And the general idea, which, for all the government's faults is absolutely true, is that the broadcast sector has been changed with the rise of over-the-top services. So that's VOD, live streaming, that's some of the streaming services you mentioned before, and that traditional broadcasters absolutely need to evolve in the face of it. So back in February, it was reported that the BBC's effectively had a £2 billion funding cut enforced upon it. And then in the immediate aftermath of that, in fact, I think that, Charlotte, did this begin last year, the talk of Channel 4 privatisation?
It seems to be a recurring theme that comes up. I mean, the Nadine Dorries came out and spoke about it, and the most recent was back in April, where she tweeted about, on April the 4th, she tweeted about her plans to privatise Channel 4. Obviously, things have shifted since then. She is no longer the culture secretary. She will no longer be responsible for this. So it will be a very interesting thing to see as the new government kind of comes in and takes place. The new culture secretary gets her feet under the desk.
Who is the new culture secretary?
I just had to look that up because I just thought, I don't know who that is, but I suppose the Queen died like 4 days after she was appointed. It's Michelle Donnellan.
Who was Health Secretary for like 48 hours. And
she has actually also worked in marketing for Marie Claire magazine.
Yep.
So,
yes, Nadine Dorries has gone back to writing books, but I don't think that... I don't know why you're laughing. That's literally what...
I know.
It's just such an odd thing to have thought.
But...
she spent all her time at DCMS making shit up, so it's probably quite a good move back for her.
Well, there was a lot of... People kept pointing out that she was, having to be informed about how Channel 4 was funded in the first place. So it's probably not the best person to have been undertaking this potential privatisation. No,
and you've spoken about the BBC as an outlier, Chris. Let's be clear. Channel 4
100%.
is an even bigger outlier. It's the weirdest, if you get into it, it's the weirdest setup.
Yeah.
But in a way, I think that's why it should be preserved, because it does kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a bit weird, but it sort of leads to quite creative stuff. I mean, for me and people my age, it's things like skins. The BBC could never make skins. It would never have got on away with making skins, but like...
Should I confess to Married at First Sight?
There we go.
Peep Show, Dark Place, all this kind of stuff that has been, probably wouldn't have...
Who's going to mention...
What are you going to do?
I'm not going to say it.
Were you going to say Big Brother?
Go on, you have to say it.
Well, there was Big Brother, of course. Yeah, Big Brother's in there. I was...
Gogglebox?
Yeah, cool. Well, it's all sorts of kind of... I mean, for me, actually, the other thing that sort of defends Channel 4 as a public service broadcaster is the work it's done on the Paralympics. Which, I mean, particularly in 2012, but it's kind of carried on, really brought Paralympic sport to the mainstream. I always mention and think of the brilliant Meet the Superhumans advert they did for London 2012. But they've really committed to that, and I think that's kind of really important. And I think you have to be careful when you're going, oh yeah, it'll be much better there'll be much freer and more creative Channel 4 if they're private, to not lose some of those elements.
100%. And in fact, a lot of the creatives who I've spoken to over the last year have said that, that it was a unique place. They would not have been able to get this commission. They would not have been able to broadcast this. They wouldn't have been able to take on some of those public service projects without it being in its current form. And notably, advertisers and broadcast unions also universally expressed their disapproval of Channel 4. And this was pretty consistent over the year. They noted that Culture Secretary's comparisons with Netflix were almost apples to oranges, didn't really take note of what Channel 4's strengths were and how it was viable and still remains to be viable And how much
also
debt
at
some
the
of those,
same
those
time
accrued.
as Netflix lost 1 million subscribers.
Well, exactly. Yeah. But it's been interesting to see how Channel 4 in particular has evolved to demonstrate that it can survive, or rather that it can do unique things in the kind of the age of streaming. So it's gone all in on sports partnerships with Amazon and some of the streamers to make sure that it does have some of those, as Charlotte mentioned, those tentpole events. And it's been really interesting to see the reaction from kind of veteran broadcasters and veteran journalists about why they believe that Channel 4 has been targeted. So there was, I think it was Jon Snow actually came out and said, that basically the government was on a revenge kick for Channel 4.
You know nothing, Jon Snow.
For actually,
there is equally an argument that Channel 4 News has opened itself up to that criticism.
Mm.
But anyway, also Channel 4 is the home of Naked Attraction. So
come on. Right. Fair enough. Okay, well, that should really be the kind of the end point of that conversation.
There's only one place in the world you could have Jon Snow and Naked Attraction.
Mm-hmm. And it's Channel 4. But it'd be, so that's sort of in the Media Moments report, that's what we're going to be digging into, is some of the stuff that's been going on.
Naked Attraction.
Fascinating. Yeah, absolutely.
Don't Google it.
So really, who knows what it means for publishers? In general, we're in that holding pattern really until we find out who the culture secretary is going to be by the time the report goes out, because I imagine it will have changed 4 or 5 times.
Don't.
Excellent.
Okay. So one of the big launches, I suppose, was, or rather kind of the big developments has been over the past, 18 months now, has been GB News and then Talk TV. So Charlotte, why don't you take us through sort of what's been going on there in terms of kind of big launches and then almost a volte-face in how people think about them?
Yeah, so GB News there was a bit of a fuss around it, as you all remember, because it was Andrew Neil, who was another big name exodus from the BBC.
For 2 weeks. For
a few weeks. I think it might have been a 3 or 4 it lasted. And there was this big launch of this thing called GB News. Everyone was like, oh my God, it's going to be Fox News in the UK. Andrew Neil was like, wait to watch it. And the long and the short of it just basically looked like absolute garbage.
That was so funny.
Like the launch was a disaster. It was a total mess. It just looked absolutely horrible.
It was some of it. Like let's take the content aside. Some of the production fuck-ups were hilarious. Like the color grading was all wrong. Everybody looked like they were in a volcano. They couldn't show submissions from people sending in pictures. The sound was all fucked up. It was just. And that New Statesman piece that we've referred to a couple of times, Peter, really went into. They went into it with this startup mentality, but none of the expertise required to do it.
So let's just finish the GB News story first, which was there was a massive, massive row at the top of the organisation. Andrew Neil and I think a few other quite significant people have walked out, and it's basically reinvented itself as this niche, feisty outlier show with some shows that get some big name hits on, in the world of diminishing broadcast numbers, it just about holds its own, if we're being fair. Some, like the Dan Wootton a couple of hours gets viewers, a couple of the others do get viewers. I think there's a whole separate conversation we could have about disinformation as well.
Oh, yeah. I thought it sort of moderated itself a bit. Like it was originally sort of pitching as this big, we're the UK's answer to the. I see a lot of head shaking.
Peter's head is just.
It hasn't been as bad as people.
Have you seen the anti-vax?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Ofcom has been. People have been saying over the last couple of days, actually, not to date the episode, but people have been saying, actually, this needs to be referred to Ofcom at this point because the vaccine disinformation.
There's been some, it's one thing to have. How can I put this delicately? Robust and perhaps never-ending debates about lockdown because that's what your niche audience cares about. There has clearly been a move into very dangerous discussions about, anti-vax discussions. As we said, let's be blunt about it. Mm-hmm. And there's been on certain shows, there's been some quite serious anti-vax stuff. At the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I recall one of the shows basically saying, well, you can't trust it. We don't really know what's going on in Ukraine. Like, we don't really know what Russia's doing. And you're like, I think we probably do.
Yeah.
I'm like, So I think we have to be.
I missed that.
So that's a slightly separate issue to like the launch and the technicalities behind it, but as well as the kind of poor production values, there has been this thing. And actually, in some ways, I hope this doesn't sound too snobby, I think the two kind of fit together. I think GB News has got this thing that it's a bit rough and ready, and it's a bit like the guy down the pub saying the things he says you can't say in public. And it's got that bit of a vibe about it. And I think that's kind of working for it.
It has established itself to some extent as that outsider.
Right.
Even though, as you said, the line has been crossed so many times, so far over the line, they can't even see the line anymore.
The line is a dot to you.
Yeah. I suppose then, GB News is still something that remains to be seen how that pans out, because the 60 million investment only just happened.
I think basically the people that like GB News, and they found the people that they found it, and that's kind of where it is. You were about to bring up Talk TV, which has sort of have had the opposite thing.
So yeah, why don't we take, because that has developed so quickly, because it launched with great fanfare, and we spoke about it on the podcast last season, that huge campaign for Piers Morgan, who was almost a flagship signing of it, which was love him or hate him, you can't miss him. Which was tempting fate.
Yes, it was tempting fate. I think Peter was teasing me on the show when you referenced it, that I I wrote that it was actually a very, very impressive launch. Yeah. And it was, by any technical standards, it was a very impressive launch. And basically the numbers, particularly for Piers Morgan, just about held their own. They weren't spectacular, but they kind of were enough to justify it going. And then everything has just fallen off a cliff, really. I mean, I think, didn't we read that the Tom Newton Dunn News Hour on some occasions has registered 0 viewers?
So funny. All the Private Eye reports into kind of the fury of Tom Newton Dunn behind the scenes has been hilarious. Oh, and Morgan blaming Newton Dunn for his low figures as well.
So I've got a genuine question here, though.
Yeah.
Because it's coming from a place, we spoke a little bit about talk radio, obviously the papers, the press that they've got. Why have they got no people watching it? Because they've got a platform elsewhere to get people towards it. Why is that not happening?
I actually haven't ever come up with a good answer to this question, because I either the people that might have watched it are already watching GB News and can't be bothered and flicked over to Talk TV, and it looked slick and a bit like, it basically looked like Fox News, didn't it? And I think some people from Fox News consulted with Talk TV people, which would make complete sense on like how the studios look and whatever. And so, including the one specially built for Piers Morgan.
I was trying to look up how much that cost, because it was in the hundreds of thousands bare minimum, wasn't it?
So I thought the launch genuinely looked really impressive. They did the whole, it was very grand. They had like the helicopter shot outside News UK headquarters, into Tom Newton Dunn, into Piers Morgan interviewing President Trump. Now, all the words in that sentence may upset you, but that doesn't mean it wasn't good TV for the people who are interested in that stuff. But yeah, it's just completely gone off the rails, and I don't have a good answer as to why, but it just it beat its rivals on the first night and has never got near since.
Yeah, I've got a theory kind of building on that, and that is, no offense to the more chronologically accomplished members of this podcast, but I think people that sit down, turn on the TV and watch whatever happens to come in live tend to be of an older age bracket, and they're going to have watched either BBC or ITV or their news channel of choice for quite some time, and to actually change that they have to be pretty pissed to get to the point they're going to switch to GB News or Talk TV. GB News, I think, swept up the dissenters quite early on. I just don't think anybody under 40 watches TV like that.
That was something that I remember, Charlotte, and you had that discussion with. Yeah. Sits
and watches the news at 10 o'clock. Like when I watch, if I want to catch up on the news, I catch up online on phone apps or whatever else. And I do just wonder if it's this sort of news broadcast. Why would I want to tune into 24-hour rolling TV station, whatever they're talking about? Just watch Netflix.
I also I want to make one final point while we're talking about both of these channels, actually. And I've made it before and I will sort of repeat it endlessly, actually. I think we have a very, very, very different media culture here to the US, and they tried to recreate a US media culture of big name news and talk shows. And basically, unless you're obsessed with James O'Brien or Dan Wootton or, people who are very, very strident in their views and you're obsessed with them as a personality. I think I offended both James O'Brien and Dan Wootton in that one sentence. But we do not have that culture. We do not have the I'm a Rachel Maddow viewer, I'm a Tucker Carlson viewer, I'm a Sean Hannity fan. That does not exist here in the UK. And all these things that we've just mentioned, particularly Talk TV, have tried to recreate that. And I just don't think it works here for whatever reason.
Thank goodness.
We're just not used to it. I suspect the existence of the BBC and the idea of neutrality around news in general in the TV news in the UK is part of that. But for whatever reason, it has never taken and worked here.
Well, we could talk about that endlessly, and I'm no doubt we will be talking about both of those entities going forward. But Peter, you want to talk about what other publishers are doing in terms of broadcast.
Yes. And as I said, as Esther might put at the top of the show, seeing we're adopting that kind of insider speak now, I have no clue about broadcast. Despite Esther's accusations of me being an old person watching the news at 10 o'clock, I don't watch a lot of TV.
You're young at heart, Peter.
Linear TV. Thanks. So I have a question rather than a moment. I was thinking back to The Independent and the Independent TV channel that I guess they launched in 2020. And it's still there. I've had a look at it and it looks good. But I just wondered, A, how's that going if anyone knows? And B, is anyone else doing similar stuff there?
Big Issue launched one, didn't they?
Yeah. I have no clue how that did either. I did
have a look, but there's not much update on any of them.
Well, here's my suspicion. When you don't hear about things, it generally means they're not doing that great. And I thought those were both really interesting initiatives, and I just wondered, anyone know what's going on?
Well, to what extent is that, because the big issue we spoke about during the pandemic and its reaction was fantastic, but I wonder if they've almost had opposite, the pandemic had opposite impacts on both of them. Because Indie TV, I was talking to them just as it launched, they were saying that their shows required sponsors. They would not commission anything unless it had a sponsor for it. Yeah. And so I think that maybe in the, as we saw a ad freeze and some budgets being frozen in the wake of the pandemic, potentially that has impacted how much they're doing, and maybe they're ramping it back up now. Whereas with the Big Issue, their response was to go all in on launching new endeavors. So I wonder if they have been galvanized in a way that has, at the same time frozen Indie TV.
I think when you look at, so one of the best words I've seen around all this debate is, well, actually that's not true. One of the words my new least favorite word is associated with this whole streaming debate, and it's rundle.
Okay. Oh, it's an unpleasant sound.
Scott Galloway, marketing guy in the States, has described regular revenue bundles as rundles.
Oh, it's such a gross.
I hate that.
And I think that idea of people like, Indie TV or whoever becoming part of other people's services is actually quite interesting, because publishers, knowing their own niche, knowing their own audiences, can create a product that maybe doesn't justify its own subscription, but as part of a rundle. It's like Scooby-Doo, isn't it? We're having a rundle. As part of that, it might work.
Before we end, though, there is one last thing that we need to talk about, and that is, as Esther, you flagged up the ad-supported tiers for Netflix, which are going to be huge in the kind of the media world.
This is my media moment that hasn't actually happened yet, but if Netflix and Disney sort of continue being in competition, it'll be introduced next week. So Netflix have brought forward their plans to introduce a lower cost ad supported tier to get ahead of Disney Plus doing the same in September. The two of them are pretty much the biggest streaming services out there now, so there's a lot of argy-bargy between the two. I don't know kind of how you guys feel about starting to see ads on services that we're paying for.
So clearly transition is happening. That's undoubted for all the example, because of all the examples you've just explained. And remember, a lot of these are starting in America and then will move to other markets. So quite clearly it's a state of transition. I don't particularly object to the introduction, depending on how it's done, of adverts to some of these streaming services if it saves me money. I don't, my show has adverts. I love advertisers. Your show has advertisers. Like, we all have advertisers. It's fine. I don't object to adverts when, if they're done in an appropriate manner. Like when I listen to podcasts, it doesn't bother me. When I watch broadcast TV and there's adverts, it doesn't bother me. It's the time to go make a cup of tea. It's fine. The problem is, particularly with Netflix, they set it up as their alternative model was you never have to see an advert. Yeah. And whether they didn't always say it explicitly, but it was certainly implicit.
And just on the Netflix thing, there's no confirmation on costs yet, but it's expected to be under £5 a month. The cheapest tier currently in the UK is about $6.99.
I just think that's such a scam.
I know, right?
It's like, keep paying what you're paying now and view ads. Oh, everyone else, you're going to be paying more. It's an excuse to put prices up.
So that's Disney Plus. Disney Plus, they announced in August that they were going to do Disney Plus Basic, which is their ad-supported version, for $7.99 a month. At which point people went, that's currently the lowest price tier. And they're like, oh yeah, the current cheapest ad-free plan is jumping up to $10.99 a month. So you can pay for the privilege of watching ads. So I was actually considering retaking up a Disney Plus subscription, but not for $10.99 a month. And I'm not overly keen on watching the ads on it. But I found this quite odd because, so in the UK, I know we were talking about Channel 4 an awful lot earlier. The deal with that, as I understood it, was always, it is free because you get adverts every 15 minutes. So this is going to be I suppose in the US they've had Hulu doing that for a lot longer, but in the UK this is going to be certainly the first time we've experienced this kind of, we're paying and watching ads at the same time.
It's not such an alien concept. As I said, the problem is more that Netflix in particular set itself up as this was the better alternative. You pay a little bit more and it gets you away from ads, and that's what's changed. We are obviously used for things that we pay for having adverts in it as well.
Yep.
How they sell that to the public is going to be so interesting to see. They're going to have to go all out in a sort of, actually, no, this is great value for those of you who, maybe want to penny pinch a little bit, that sort of stuff. It's going to be interesting to see.
But like, there's great value for maybe saying, we'll put you on a sort of £2 or £3 a month thing, and then for Disney to say it's going to be the equivalent of like £6 a month, that's not cheap. But that's not a tempting deal.
But you know what? They won't make it £6 a month. They'll absolutely do dollar sterling parity the same way as Apple did. It'll be $10.99. It won't be. They won't do some weird exchange rate.
Mike, you guys know a lot more about the kind of ad industry than me. If you're an advertiser, do you want to be associated with the quote unquote penny pinching kind of platform? Is that where you want your ads? Is that the target audience? I mean, that's quite an interesting new dynamic to it as well, isn't it?
You do if you're Aldi.
That is exactly right. I just recorded a podcast yesterday for The Drum about programmatic, and the big thing was everyone's very excited about programmatic allowing you to buy across TV, and that's going to really open that up to, Charlotte, as you said, those kind of fast-moving consumer goods, some of those brands that would never have been able to advertise on TV before, or that they perceived themselves as being unable to. So yeah, we're going to see a much broader range of advertisers potentially take this up.
It's good in the sense that I suppose if publishers are looking to perhaps introduce ads alongside subscriptions, they could, but for things like Disney Plus and Netflix, it just, the way they're doing the price rises, it just feels a little bit greedy to me. And I know Netflix, doesn't make a vast amount of money. And I suppose it's that thing, if we've been climatized to getting a huge library of very, very expensive content for $5.99 a month, and actually that's not sustainable, and we need to understand the reality of that a bit more.
Well,
or are people paying for this? Are they going to then see ads and think, yeah, but you're just doubling up the money you're making on me?
That's a classic digital's original sin. Give people something for nothing and then try and charge them for it. And fundamentally, get your buzzer ready, Chris. Fundamentally, it comes down to VC, rapacious capitalistic greed.
I'm so glad we started the new season with some of the old catchphrases, just so people know that we've not changed all that much.
Because with these people, it's always a scale play. Always. It's always about scale. And it's fundamentally never about profit and loss in the most basic sense of how much you spend and how much you make. You know, if you look at Disney and Netflix, actual profit per user, it's wildly different. Because Netflix is having to buy or make loads and loads of content. Disney's got Walt's archive.
That's such an important point. And there was really good stuff on the Ankler about this, and I did a little bit of writing on it as well, about how when everyone got excited that Disney had caught up with Netflix is still making significantly more per subscriber than Disney. And that's Peter's point is a very important one to have in mind as the kind of next phase of streaming plays out.
I think we said before we went on hiatus that this is going to be the year of ARPU. And that's probably, I mean, I know I hate the term.
Bundles and ARPUs. I've had enough of this episode.
Right. Well, like I said, all of this is going to be available in depth in our Media Moments 2022 report, which is going to be out, Esther, when?
November the 30th.
You can pre-register for that, so please do. And also, we'd like to give thanks again to Membership and Subscription Suite Pool for sponsoring this season of the Media Voices podcast and the report itself. So if you'd like to learn more about topics like optimizing subscription conversion rates, stealable retention strategies, and tips like how to limit the impact of paywalls on SEO, they've got a ton of helpful resources at blog.poool.tech, and that is triple O in pool. And don't forget, you can pre-register to download the Media Moments 2020 report by going to voices.media/mm22.
Or if you're listening to this after November the 30th, you can just go to the same address.
But Charlotte, thanks so much for taking the time to come on and share your expertise.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great to chat to you guys.
Of course, do you want to give a quick plug for everything you're doing?
Yeah, head over to theedition.substack.com. That's edition with A-double-D. And I'm at Charlotte A. Henry on Twitter, so when you listen to the show, you can tell me all the reasons I'm wrong.
Yeah, I can't wait to get back into that.
Don't be encouraging that.
Next week, we're going to be looking at how the advertising market's fared in 2022, and we're going to be joined by Business Insider's Laura O'Reilly to discuss key moments and what publishers can expect going into next year. But for now, thank you so much for listening to this first episode of the Media Voices Media Moments 2022 season. Is that right?
Nice.
Okay, thank you so much for listening, and do stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.